Okay, today we're going to talk about Kansai Special DFB series, and we're going to show you how to change the loofah rocker. I'm going to show you how to change the loofah rocker. Okay, so first we remove our covers, we removed our cloth plate, and now we're going to remove the presser foot, the adapter plate. We have to remove a few other covers. So, needle wrench. Get the needles out of your way, otherwise you'll get pricked. Needles out of your way, remove your presser foot. Remove your adapter plate. These pins are a little tight. Come on. Whoa. All right, that adapter plate, it's held on by 2 screws, and you have the pins here to make sure it's aligned. Those pins were a little tight. You got to sort of get them equally, lift them equally at the same time. If you lift one side too much, you won't be able to get the back side. If you lift the back side too much, so you got to get equal pressure on them. If they're that tight, get some equal pressure on both sides and pop it out of there. Okay, remove your feed dog. Didn't we just work on this machine? Oh, this is a new one, right? Yeah. Oh. Remove the feed dog. And we'll have to remove this cover, your reservoir cover. Remove your reservoir cover. And you'll have to remove this little plate right here. This little front plate. Now remember where your eyelet was. You got one eyelet on this plate. We're going to remove this plate. You have to remember where that was. That's pretty important. Okay, we're going to get our spreaders. I'm going to get the spreaders out of our way. Okay, we'll take them, you know what, we'll take them all the way out, since we're gonna look at them, do the timing, and look at them after we install a looper rocker. I'll just take them all the way out of the way for now. You can probably just loosen it from here and slide them up, not remove the whole bar, but it is a little easier if the entire spreader bar is out of your way. Pull your 4 spreaders out. Remove your spreader bar. Okay, and now we got a good look at our looper holder, looper rocker. So now we're going to I'm going to remove the looper holder also. Again, you don't have to. We can probably pull this shaft out without taking the looper holder off. You can probably do it with the looper holder on there. But just be careful you don't get yourself with those pointy, sharp loopers. But I'm going to remove it. It'll be easier to see. Okay, and there's a nut behind it. Holding that nut with my finger. It's a fairly long screw. Take the screw out. And second screw. Okay, so we removed the looper holder with your loopers and your needle guards. And now you can see the looper rocker. Here are the 2 nuts from the screws we just took out. Okay, so here's your looper rocker, your looper stopper, looper rocker. There's a spring in there. Okay, you will have to change this. The reason we're showing this is over a period of time, usage, wear and tear, you will have to change this looper rocker. Also, this is one of the biggest problems we see when we go, when a customer is having skipping problems. One of the biggest problems we see is that there's play, right to left play in your looper rocker. And the reason this is because most people, most mechanics, will try moving their looper distance from this Allen screw here on my looper stopper. So most mechanics try to adjust the looper distance by loosening this screw on the looper stopper. And that is not the correct way to do it. The correct way is to go inside the reservoir cover and loosen it from this 7mm hexagon screw on the looper shaft inside the machine under the reservoir cover. Okay, if you do, the problem is when you do loosen it from here, they'll loosen it a little, even if you don't loosen it all the way. If you loosen it from here, even if you don't loosen it all the way, and then you tap on this looper rocker, because you want it to move it back maybe a 0.5 millimeter, or if you tap on it this way, maybe to move it forward a 0.5 millimeter, it will also slide. It will slide out on you. Why? You think you're just tapping it a little and it won't move. It'll slide out on you, and then you'll have play in your looper rocker. Okay, now we're going to remove the looper shaft and show you how to put the looper rocker back in. Now the reason, well, let me continue. One of the reasons you need to change your looper rocker is your stopper, the pin. Well, when we take this out, we can look at it more closely. But the looper stopper, this pin, has to lock into that looper stopper. Okay, and that hole, the hole in the stopper, between the hole in the stopper and the end of that pin, they will wear out over time. And then that'll cause a little play in your looper rocker. A little front to back play. It'll be a little wobbly as this hole gets wallowed out. As that hole gets wallowed out, you'll get a little play in your loofah rocker. So over time, you will have to change this. Okay, so now we have to remove our shaft here that drops your loopers. Okay, 3mm. Put a 3mm Allen wrench in there. Hold this side with a pair of pliers. Break it loose. And we remove our loofah drop down shaft or pin and the fork. And put that to the side. Okay, now to remove your loofah rocker, you have basically only 3 screws on this side you have to loosen. You have a collar, you have your loofah rocker stopper, and you have another collar that sits in between your loofah rocker stopper and your take-up, your looper take-up eccentric. Okay, so there's just 3 screws on this side. And then there's another 2 screws on the inside. The screw that moves, the screw that's for your adjustment, your front to back distance on your looper, should be adjusted from this 7mm hexagon screw here. So we're going to loosen that. And then there's a collar up against your bushing. The collar up against your bushing. We have to remove that, and that's how that collar needs to be set right up against that bushing when we put the looper rocker back in. So basically 5 screws on this shaft. Okay, so first we're going to loosen the collar. Okay, so I'm going to loosen this collar here. Okay, collar loose. Then this collar in between the stopper and the looper avoid eccentric, you have to get out from behind. It's a little tricky to get at. Okay, and I'm not sure what size it is. Let's see, is it a 4? It's a 4mm. 4mm Allen. I have it in there. And there. Okay. Okay. Now we got to remember when we go back and set that, that'll be one of the last things we set anyway. But you got to do it facing, that nut has to face straight back. Okay, that screw, that bolt has to face straight back. Okay, that's loose. That collar is loose. Okay, now I'm going to drop the loopers down and we're going to loosen our stopper. Okay, looper rocker stopper. Okay, loose, and there you go. As you can see, it's loose. You see the spring on it. There's a spring attached under that stopper. There's a spring attached to it. So when I loosen it, it just sprung backwards. Okay, now inside, now we're going to loosen our 7mm hexagon screw. That's the screw that adjusts your looper distance. Okay. 7mm hexagon screw. Okay, now that's all the way loose. So basically that was four things. 2 collars, the stopper, and now we're going to start taking the shaft out. You're going to use this while this is still tight. While this last collar is still tight, you can use it to help you work the shaft out. We're going to pull the shaft out now. So before I even loosen, see, I can help myself. Alright, now that I got the shaft started, I will go ahead. That's another 4mm Allen. Okay, I'm going to continue to use this collar here to help me move the shaft out. Now there's a washer. There's a copper washer. After that collar, in between the bushing and the collar, there's a copper washer. Make sure you don't drop that in the machine. That's better. Okay, you have a collar and a copper washer. Make sure as you pull the shaft out, you don't lose that washer. But I'm going to use this collar. I'm going to continue to use it. I'll tighten it back up. Use it to help me move the shaft. Loosen it. Slide it over. Tighten it. So I'm using this collar to help me. Now I got it out. Got to be careful not to lose that. Got to be careful not to lose that. Alright, copper washer and the copper. So collar, copper washer. And at this point, we're going to pull the whole shaft out. And you might want to lay everything out to remember what goes first, what goes, so you copper goes against the bushing, copper washer against the bushing, then your collar. Okay, now I'm going to pull this out. Okay, we're pulling the entire shaft is out. Okay, there's your loofah rocker, there's your stopper, there's your spring, and on this end of the shaft again, you have a collar and the copper washer which goes against the bushing. And this is the collar that's in between your stopper and your looper take-up rod essentially. Okay, so that's all the parts in there that we just took out. Oh, one more washer, yep. This copper washer goes near the other bushing. Okay, so this will go, this copper washer you'll have to slide in here between the take-up. This will have to be slid in there when we put that shaft back on. Okay. 3 copper washers. Now, we remove the loofah rocker. We're going to install it. One other important thing, on the loofah rocker shaft, on the shaft we just pulled out, there's an oil hole. When we put this back in, we'll talk about it again, that oil hole has to be facing straight up. You can see it from the inside here. Okay, so we've got to remember to keep that oil hole, after we set it, that oil hole has to remain straight up. Okay, so now we're going to install copper washer against the brass bushing, collar, okay, collar, loofah rocker. Now when you install your loofah rocker, you have to put your spring in there. There's a hole, that part of the spring right there, there's a hole in your loofah rocker. You put that right inside. Okay, then your looper stopper. You have to take your looper stopper and place that fork, place that end of it, that slope there, that point on the looper rocker. That has to go in this little curve on the spring. That has to go in there. Okay, so you'll have to put that in there when you install it. Alright, so you got to make sure, as you're doing it, you have to make sure the spring doesn't slide out of that hole. So the whole time you're doing this, you have to make sure that spring stays in there. Okay, so we're going to install at the same time the looper rocker and the spring, making sure that that spring does not slide out. Okay. So we got that. We got our washer, collar, looper rocker, and the spring. Now we have to take our stopper, and while we put it on the shaft, we have to make sure that fork, make sure that point, that slope, that edge on the end of the looper stopper goes inside that spring. We've got to make sure that then, now as I push the shaft in, make sure that spring does not come out of that hole. That should be it. Oh. Just work your shaft back and forth a little bit until you, okay, I'm in. So as you can see, my shaft is in already. My shaft is through, but you have to make sure that that spring doesn't slide out on you while you're doing this. While we install everything else, make sure that spring doesn't slide out on you. Okay, so now we have to put another collar. This is the collar that goes in between the stopper and the, let's take this out of our way. Okay, we have to get this take-up out of our way. Okay, here's that take-up. That's the looper take-up essential. We'll get that out of our way for a second. And we'll put this collar on. Okay, that collar is on. Oh, wrong way. Remember, now we're tightening that towards the back. I put it on the wrong way. So the shiny side actually goes against the stopper. You have one side that's black and the other side is finished, polished. That's the side that goes against your stopper. Okay, then we take our looper take-up eccentric. We drop that down. And we work the shaft through there. Okay, making sure that spring doesn't slide out on us. Now we're tight enough. Everything fits tight in there, so we should be tight enough where that spring won't drop down on us. Okay, next, now we have to get this brake. We have to get this copper washer in between the take-up lever and the bushing there. Okay, I grab a tweezer, I take my washer, and I slide it in there. Okay, and then as I put that washer in there with my tweezer, now I'm holding it out. I'm holding it up there with my shaft. So my shaft is, and I'm going to work this in, leaving my shaft there holding it, twisting my shaft back and forth, and eventually it drops right in. Okay, now we're going to put this back through the shaft. On the inside, our looper avoid eccentric. This is our looper avoid eccentric. And this is this nut, this is the screw that we want to make all of our looper adjustments. Our looper distance adjustment should be made from here. Okay, so now that's back in the shaft. And then the collar. And the last brass bushing. Nothing is tight yet. And the last copper bushing. Okay, so we put on our collar, and last of all, we put our brass washer, or copper washer. Now we can put the shaft all the way in. Put the shaft all the way in, basically flush with the bushing. I'm going to push the shaft all the way in until it's basically flush with the bushing there. Alright, at this point, everything is loose. We put our looper shaft in. Everything is loose. Yes, that collar is also, everything is loose right now. Okay, so the way we set this, we bring our looper stopper down, and we take our screwdriver, and we go in between the spreader bracket and the looper stopper. And we pry that, the looper stopper, the spring, everything to the left. We come back and we make sure we're flush. Now we have to make sure our loop, remember we spoke about our oil hole. The oil hole in this shaft has to be facing straight up and down. So I'm continuing to hold my looper stopper. And I come over here and I do not see my oil holes. Okay, so we have to find the hole. The oil hole has to be facing straight up. So we're going to use this collar to turn the shaft. As we're turning the shaft, we're looking for the oil hole. You got to look from the back side. Turn, loosen, tighten, turn. So the collar is moving my shaft. Okay, now we're making sure our oil hole is straight up. When we put this looper shaft in, our oil hole has to be straight up. But we're going to actually offset it towards the rear of the machine. I'm offsetting that looper hole. You can use this collar to move your shaft. Right now everything's loose. And I'm moving this collar to move my shaft until I find the oil hole. And I want to offset the oil hole towards the back a little bit, because when I snap these loopers in, that'll bring the oil hole a little more forward, and it should be straight up and down. Okay, so my oil hole right there. It's offset towards the back.
This is the right position.
It's in the right position. Yes, that's the right position. Offset it to the back a little bit. Because now, when I pull this collar, as I pull this stopper forward to get my screwdriver in between it, that shaft will probably come forward a little bit. Okay. So now, I'm back to setting the looper. Screwdriver in between the collar. Shaft is flush. We're holding our looper stopper to the left. We come back to our collar. Right now all screws are loose. We take this collar. We tighten it up against the bushing. We come back. And we tighten our stopper. Okay. We make sure there's no play. Okay, no play. and our looper rocker. Good. Now we want to make sure it drops easily. Make sure it drops easily. Oh, I tightened that too far back. Pop it in, drop it down. Okay, it's dropping nice and easy. And there's no play, that's good. Now we want to check our oil hole again. Okay. It's towards the back a little, but that's okay because we still got to set our looper distance. We still have to set our looper distance, and we'll probably bring it forward a little, and then it'll be straight up and down. So I think the hole is in a good spot right now. It's offset towards the rear a little. Even in that position, it's still going to get oil. The oil is supplied by these hoses here. So it's still going to receive oil, but when we set the looper rocker, when we put the looper holder back on, when we put the looper holder back on, and we put our needles in, it's probably going to be more than 3 millimeters. We'll have to pull it forward, and that will put the looper hole, put the oil hole straight up and down. Okay, and we'll do that in a second. Okay, so now we set our looper rocker, and our oil hole is straight up. If you look, can you get that camera in there? As you turn your hand wheel, that looper rocker shaft will rock back and forth. So right there it's straight up and down, and then it goes towards the back a little, but in that position it will get plenty of oil. So our oil hole is in the correct position. If that oil hole is not in the right place, that shaft will not receive oil. That oil goes through the center of the shaft and feeds oil to the bushings, to the eccentric, to the collar that holds the spreader bar. So it feeds oil to the looper holder and the bushings. Okay, so very important that you get that oil hole straight up and down. Okay. Okay, at this point, we want to come back and make sure everything's good and tight. So I'm going to tighten my stopper very good. Okay. And I'm going to tighten my collar very good.
How to push?
Okay, that's already pushed. We already did that. So there's no play right now. Remember, when you put your looper rocker in, you hold the stopper to the left. Everything is loose. Every collar is loose. Oh, that's not. Everything is loose, and you hold your stopper to the left. You hold your collar to the right. You tighten your collar first, then you come back and tighten your looper stopper. Okay, then we check for no play, and we have no play. And of course we check to make sure it's popping in and out easily and dropping down, and that was correct. Okay, now we want to come back and tighten our collars. Okay, we have 2 collars to tighten. This collar that's in between the stopper and the bushing. We come back and tighten. Okay, and then our other collar with the bolt facing straight back. 4mm bolt facing straight back, that's in between the looper stopper and the eccentric, the take up eccentric. Okay, we tighten that up. I'm not going to tighten this all the way yet because when we set the looper distance that might move a little. So this one I'm just going to snug up for now. I'll come back and tighten it all the way. Okay. Okay, now we're going to put our looper holder back on and check our looper distance. Okay, looper holder back on. Okay, first we have our 2 nuts. They go behind. Okay, our 2 nuts. It's a special nut. It gets inserted into the slot. The looper holder has 2 slots in it. So we're going to insert them into the slots. Now I have to put the looper holder back on, so I'll have to pop this back up. Let's go ahead and tighten this for now. We're going to tighten from our hexagon screw here on the inside. Okay. Alright, I pop it back in place. I keep my finger behind that washer. Behind the nut. My finger's behind the nut. I put the loofah holder back on. I take our screw. Okay, that's one screw in. Get my finger behind that nut to hold it in place. Okay. We're going to put our needles back in and check our looper distance. I could just put 2 needles in for now. I'll just put 2 needles in for now so we can check both sides to make sure. Needles, scarf facing to the left, front to back looper machine, scarf facing to the left. Okay. Then I have to align my looper rocker. It's too far. Remember that the looper rocker has 2 long elongated slots in it. 2 elongated slots. So we can move the looper holder back and forth, right and left. Okay, so as you see, I loosen the screws, it moves right and left. So we got to center that. Okay. Put my looper holder back where it belongs. Tighten it down. And now we want to set our looper distance because we moved it. We took out our looper shaft. So now we set our looper distance. Whenever you set your looper distance, very important, do not adjust it from the stopper. We want to come inside under the reservoir cover and loosen it from where the looper eccentric is. Okay, 7mm hexagon screw. Alright, needles all the way down, looper all the way back. We want 2.5mm from the tip of the looper to the back of the needle, 2.5mm, or 3mm from the tip of the looper to the center of the needle. So what I do is I take a 3mm wrench and I take a 2.5mm wrench and I will, the 2.5 is far and the 3 is away, so it needs to come forward a little. So I loosen it, come forward. This is actually going to make our oil hold just about perfect. Alright, needles all the way down, loopers all the way back. The 3 is still not touching. I want to make sure the 3 is touching. The 3 should be a little tight and the 2.5 should go through smoothly. Loosen that again. Tap on it from behind. Moved up a little. Okay, 3. Oh, I'm getting a little, yeah. That's better. The 3 is a little tight. I have to force it through a little. And the 2.5 is about perfect. Okay, we could probably leave it there. Maybe back just a tad. Okay, at this point, we set our looper distance. We come back and we tighten our 7mm hexagon nut. And we are finished. We changed our looper rocker.